Hi, this is Jeff Klein, and this video will review the use of the Radiographics Electronic Exhibit Review System for panel chairs. And hopefully you've had an opportunity to either look at the WebEx or look at the associated video which reviews how to assign exhibits to your panelists or to yourself. Again, you can do that either by choosing panelists individually and then assigning any number of exhibits to them, or you can do it exhibit by clicking on the icon that is next to each exhibit here, which says Assign Panelist, and you can choose a panelist or multiple panelists for each individual exhibit. You'll see here that I have logged in as the chairperson of neuroradiology for the purposes of this demonstration, and here I am looking at a list of all exhibits that have been assigned to neuroradiology for review. You can see there's 343 total displayed exhibits. The first thing you'll notice is that there is a button on the upper left-hand corner of the window which says Enter up to 5 hot topics. You will need to do this at some point during your deliberations and before you make your final recommendations to us for solicitation for the upcoming cycle. You will not be able to complete your list of recommended exhibits unless you enter the 5 hot topics. So please remember to do that at some point during your panel meeting or thereafter before you enter your final recommendations. You can see here I've got a list of all exhibits that have been assigned. If I wish to look only at those that have been assigned to me personally, as a panel chair, I can obviously review all of these or some of these. And you'll see here when I click on the Exhibits tab and I go to Assign to Me, those that are in blue in the left-hand column here will be the ones that will show up as being assigned to me. And you'll see that there is a pencil mark next to those which I can review and I can score myself. You can see there's 7 of those that have been assigned to me. If I wish to go to the list of all those that are not assigned to me, it will be all of the remaining exhibits, and these presumably are going to be assigned to your panelists for review. So when the list of not assigned to me comes up here, you will see a list of 336 total displayed exhibits, all of which are to be scored by the panelists on your panel. Now, when in the exhibits list view, you'll see again we're looking at all the exhibits, those that are or are not assigned to me personally to review and score. There are a series of columns along the top of the window, and let's go through each of these in turn. Obviously, the ID relates to the ID number of the particular exhibit. If you wish to organize those alphabetically, you could certainly do that by clicking on ID. Here I'm doing it twice, and you can see that at least alphabetically, the first exhibits that show up begin with E, and then alphabetically on down. You can then go to the title. I don't know that you want to organize these by title. Again, this will be alphanumeric, so it would be by the first letter of the first word of the title of the exhibit. Format's important. If you click on Format, I'll do that twice here, you'll see that the initial ones that come up are those that are digital presentation systems, DPS. If I look at the bottom of the list, you'll note that the poster or standalone poster exhibits become next in the list, and then finally there is a single standalone computer exhibit in the list of neuroradiology exhibits to review. If I click on the Enter Private Comments header, those exhibits that have private comments that I've added will be listed here at the top. Complete column indicates those exhibits that have received at least one completed scoring. And you'll see here those exhibits here, there's a list of 6 that at least one of the panelists or myself have entered a score, and you can see that in this particular example, this shows 50%, meaning presumably 1 of 2 or 2 of 4 panelists have scored that particular exhibit. If I wish to organize these exhibits by the recommendations of the panelists to solicit, I can click on the Solicit button. You'll notice that those that have a yes indication from a panelist to solicit come to the top, maybe would be next, and those that would be no would go below. I can also organize the list of exhibits by the average panel score, averaging the scores of all of those panelists that have scored the exhibit, again, bringing the highest scored average score exhibit to the top. Again, if there's an indication by a panelist that they wish to discuss this exhibit, I can click on that and you'll see that there are 3 exhibits that I have recommended be discussed. If there are conflicts, if any of the panelists have indicated that they have conflicts, then you can click on that and then you'll see there is one exhibit here that I have indicated I have a conflict with. Display error are those exhibits in which one of the panelists or more of the panelists have indicated that there is a problem with the display. And you can see there's one here in which there's an indication of yes. And so those you may wish to reassign or check to see that they're working. If you click on the suitable for resident and fellow scoring, that would indicate that at least one or more of the panelists felt that the exhibit was more geared towards your members in training. And so that is something you'll need to discuss and determine if you make recommendations as to whether this should be for a standard manuscript or whether you should pass it on to the resident and fellow committee to be considered as an online interactive PowerPoint presentation for the radiographics fundamentals section of the online journal. The final column indicates whether the exhibit has been deemed suitable for scoring by the radiographics panel. So obviously most of all of these should be yes, but there perhaps are some that may reflect
under ID, and then the first
exhibits
icon
that
to
are
the right
original investigations
that
or
indicates
simply
that we can view that
more
particular
geared towards
exhibit. If we
residents
click
and
on this
fellows, and
link,
so
it
you
will
might
take us
indicate here that
to the
there's
digital
no,
presentation system, and we can
most
look
of
at the
these will be
PowerPoint,
yes, obviously,
or
since they've been chosen for
if
your
it's a
panel for
poster
review.
board, then there should be a PDF file associated with the particular exhibit that you can view in the system. If no such file exists and it's an actual hard copy poster, you are not obligated to score that particular exhibit, as the exhibitors have been notified now for several years that if they don't submit a digital file with their hard copy poster exhibit, that the journal is not obligated to evaluate it for potential invitation or solicitation to the journal. But it's up to you if you wish to go and look at a particular poster at the exhibit hall. You can certainly do that, or have your panelists do that. The second icon you'll see to the right of the exhibit number indicates chair options. If I click on that particular option, it should bring up a window, which then gives me a series of options as the chair, in this case for the neuroradiology panel. You can see here that I can contact the chairs of other panels if there's an issue with overlap or other issue that you wish to communicate with another panel chair. By clicking on this link, it'll bring up the emails for the chairs of the other panels. You'll also note here that this indicates how many exhibits you have recommended thus far be solicited for submission. The next question is going to be whether the invitation should be for a full-length manuscript or should this be for residents and fellows. If for residents and fellows, this will then go to the resident and fellow group. So let's say I'm going to invite this for the neuroradiology panel, and I want that as a full-length manuscript. So I'm going to click on that option, and then it's going to ask me the solicitation priority. And here I'm going to indicate whether this should be a fast track. Again, you should be choosing one exhibit amongst all the ones you recommend as the fast track. High, moderate, or low priority. Let's put this as a high priority. And then you'll see here I've suggested, or you've suggested actually, that Dr. Jones be a reviewer for the manuscript. I've also indicated here that this should be invited for commentary, and I've recommended the name of the individual who I would recommend be considered for writing the associated commentary. You can see that I can share comments with the exhibit authors as they're invited. These could be from you yourself, obviously, or it could be collated from the comments that were given to you during your panel discussion from the panelists themselves. And then if you have specific comments to be sent to me that you don't wish to share with the authors, or otherwise, you can indicate them here in this window. And then I'm going to save that here and then close that window. The third icon is the Assign Panelists. And again, as previously, it'll load a list of those panelists, and you can assign an additional or different panelists to review this specific exhibit by clicking on their name and then saving. And the fourth icon to the right here that you'll see is a tool icon, and this will give us statistics. And this will bring up a window in which, in this particular case, I can look and see how many panelists have completed their evaluation, whether they've recommended that it be solicited. You can see one here, the individual who completed this particular review recommended that maybe this should be solicited. You can see the score that that individual gave, and this will be an average score for all panelists, but in this case there's only one. And then you can see here, this lists your specific panel, as there are going to be other panels that might review exhibits that overlap in topic and content. And so this gives you the scoring specific to your neuroradiology panelists. If there were more than one panel, you'd see the scores for the other panels given here as well. And then if you click on this button below, you can see this is the individual who scored it. You can see my name listed here. Again, I thought it was suitable for evaluation. I suggested that maybe this should be solicited, and then you see my specific score. So this gives you a lot of granular detail on the scoring for this particular exhibit. A brief review on assigning exhibits. Again, this can be done in one of two ways. First could be through choosing the Assign Panelists icon next to each of the exhibits in your list of exhibits to be evaluated. So again, if I do that, for example, for this fourth exhibit here, I will click on the hand icon, and this should bring up a window with a list, alphanumeric list of panelists for, in this example, the neuroradiology subspecialty panel. And again, I can choose to assign this. Let's, for example, say I assign this to Doug Phillips. I can click here on his name, and that will show that it's assigned to Doug. And then I can simply close this list, and that will assign the exhibit to Doug Phillips. He will receive an email indicating that he has been chosen or asked to review that particular exhibit. The other way to do this more efficiently is to do this by choosing the individual panelist and then assigning one or more exhibits to him or her. And that's done in the panelist list. So here we're going to click on panelists at the top here, which will bring us the same list of panelists that we just saw. You can then choose a panelist. Let's say I choose Doug again. I'll click on Doug's name. And once I've done that, you will see a large table of those exhibits assigned to neuroradiology. And again, hopefully you've got a list of these next to you or in a different window, so you have titles and institutions and you know which exhibits are being assigned to Doug. But you can choose individual exhibits here. You can also choose them all by clicking on all if we want to be unkind and have Doug review over 300 exhibits, or choose the individual ones that we'd like for him to review, and clicking on those and then saving will assign those particular exhibits to the panelist, in this case Doug Phillips. So let's review scoring an exhibit. We're here in our exhibit list, and again, those exhibits that have been assigned to me to score are marked in blue with a pencil mark next to them. And so I'm going to go to this one here, NR104 EDX. You can see it has no score. It has not been completed by anybody, but it is assigned to me. So I'm going to click on the exhibit number. So you see here's the exhibit, and the first thing I'm going to be asked is whether I have a conflict of interest with this particular exhibit, or if there's some technical issue or problems with the display, or it's missing. Perhaps it's a poster board and there's no digital file, and you do not wish to review this in the exhibit hall. You would click on one of these, as the case may be. But let's assume you think this is an appropriate exhibit to be scored. You would click yes, obviously. If you feel no, then we're going to ask you for indicating a reason as to why you do not think radiographics should consider the exhibit. Perhaps it's an original investigation or a series of case studies. It may overlap with something that we've recently published or is in print. It may have too few or low quality images. Maybe you feel that there's some issue of copyright or some other reason. And if you feel another reason, we ask you to indicate in the text field what reason you feel this shouldn't be reviewed by a panel. But for the most part, obviously, you're going to say yes to this, and then we're going to ask you whether you think this should be submitted as a standard full-length manuscript published in the journal, as such, or whether you feel this is something that should be considered for members in training for the Radiographics Fundamentals online PowerPoints. If we choose that we wish to evaluate this as a full-length manuscript, it will bring up a series of 5 categories of assessment. Each of these 5 will have some text associated with it explaining what it is that we're looking for when you score for this. The scoring should be on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the highest, 1 being the lowest. You can choose any of these. You can clear a result if you want to change it. And again, you can bring up the text that explains what you should be looking for. But let's go ahead and score this particular one. We're going to score it fairly highly. And then it's going to ask you whether this should be recommended for solicitation. And here you'll say yes. You want to indicate whether you're willing to review this yourself if it should be submitted. If you feel that this needs to be discussed during the panel meeting, you can click here and you can enter some comments that will be seen by the panel chair during the discussion. If you feel that this is appropriate for commentary, you can click here and then add the name of the individual that you think should be providing the commentary. And then you can add your own personal or private comments that will only be seen by you when you're logged into the system, but will not be viewable by anybody else. And then at the last text bar here, text box, you will indicate any comments you'd like to pass on to the authors. This should be from the panelists and from yourself. And obviously, we'll only go to the authors who are invited for solicitation. You save that, and you will see it will indicate that your evaluation has been successfully saved in the system.
So now we're going to focus on the reports feature of the electronic exhibit review system. We can access the series of reports that are available to you as panel chair, either by choosing reports here or at the top of the window. So let's look at the reports that are available. So when I click on reports, you'll see that there is a list of 10 reports that are available. 6 of these are specific to your role as panel chair. The others are related to your role as a panelist. And so all panelists have these 4 reports available. So let's focus on the reports that are available to you as chair. Again, in this case, I'm the chair for neuroradiology, and you'll see here that in the report that is titled Panelist Recommendation to Chair, you'll see that these are the list of the exhibits that have been reviewed in which one or more panelists has recommended that we consider soliciting the paper. You'll see here's a list. There's 6 papers here. You'll see that in this column here, I've actually already assigned a high solicitation priority to one of these papers. But if I want to simply look at those papers in which one or more panelists have indicated that yes, they'd think that this should be solicited, I'll click on the yes column here, and then you'll note all those with a yes, and then there's one here where the maybe will show up. So all of those with yes or maybe will show up in this panelists list of recommendations to the chair. And then you can go through each one of these under the panel chair options, and you'll see in this window is where you will make a decision as to whether this should be solicited for the panel. You, again, as I mentioned earlier, you can contact other panel chairs by clicking here, and it'll bring up a list of other panel chairs who have reviewed this particular exhibit, and you may want to communicate with them about something. You'll see here that there's only been one exhibit that has been recommended by myself for solicitation. That's the one that I listed as high priority. So you'll see here I can indicate whether I think this should be solicited, and then fill out, again, the priority and then the other fields here, and then save that information. I'm going to close this without making a recommendation. The next list or report that's available is panelists marked not appropriate for radiographics. So this is a list of any exhibit in which one of the panelists has felt that for whatever reason they feel this is not an exhibit that we should be considering for the journal. When you have these, you may want to look at these and check off and confirm that these indeed do not warrant consideration. The next report is Panelist Recommendation for Residents and Fellows. Here you will see a list of any exhibits that have been indicated by a panelist that they should be considered for the Resident and Fellow Committee. You're going to pass on a maximum of 3 of these to the Resident and Fellow group, and you're going to score them for resident fellow submissions. But this is where that list is available to you. And again, there should be 3 of these, no more than 3, that you're recommending. Any exhibit in which there is an indication that a panelist has a conflict will show up here in this 4th report. You will look at this and hopefully there's some indication as to why the panelist decided not to review this. You see here I indicated this was from my institution. And so assuming you agree, you can then assign this particular exhibit to another panelist. Okay? And you can agree here. And then it'll bring up a list of panelists and you can assign this to a different panelist. In the next report, there's assignments, and this is actually where you can check who is reviewing each of the exhibits. You'll see this is a list of all of the exhibits, and you'll see that the list of who is assigned will appear here in this Panelists Assigned column. Again, you can assign each of these individually to one or more panelists or to yourself, but this is where you can check on the list of exhibits and to whom they've been assigned. Finally, final decisions. This is a list of where your final recommendations to us are going to be made. This year, as most years, you're going to list 10 exhibits with different priorities, 1 fast track and the remainder high, moderate, or low priority. This is exclusive of those that you decide to send on to the resident and fellow panel for consideration. And so this should be your final list that you should submit to the office, to our editorial office, when you have completed your panel review process and you've rendered your decisions as to which the exhibits in your panel should be invited for submission.